Chapter 6. A Community in the Making. As established in the preceding chapter, Muhammad, peace be upon him, was now a prophet, receiving revelations from God through the angel Gabriel and a messenger required to convey God's message to mankind. He was fully aware of the magnitude of the change which this message would bring about in the life of Arabian society at the time, and human life in general. He was also aware that when he had to make his message known to people, he was bound to meet opposition. He himself, however, accepted the new faith and declared his belief in God's oneness, fully reassured that his was the true divine faith. The enormous difficulty of the task ahead did not deter him from attempting it. The fact that opposition was bound to be fierce was not to stop him from dedicating all his energy and efforts to calling on people to abandon their erroneous beliefs in favor of the new message God was addressing to mankind through him. He was, however, directed by God to keep his message secret for the time being, and only to approach those whom he thought would give a favorable response. The first to accept his new faith was his wife Khadija. She already knew him to be a man of noble heart and upright nature. She trusted that her husband, who had never said something which he knew to be untrue, would have never contemplated making a claim to prophethood if it was not absolutely true. Knowing her husband to be exemplary in his honesty and truthfulness, she realized that he was the man God would have chosen as his messenger to mankind. She willingly and assuredly declared that she believed in God's oneness and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was God's messenger. It was indeed a blessing that Khadija should readily accept the new faith. She was to give the Prophet her unwavering support and comfort him in the years to come when opposition to his message was to increase in ferocity and wickedness. When he went out to discharge his duty as a messenger, he might receive insults, ridicule, and physical assault. He would return home sad and downhearted, but she would always be ready with her encouragement and support. She did her best to comfort him, and he would soon regain his cheerful, optimistic attitude. For this unwavering support, Gabriel once came to the Prophet telling him to convey God's greeting to Khadija and give her the happy news that she had a special home in heaven where she would enjoy total bliss and happiness. An authentic hadith related by Muslim quotes the Prophet as saying, "The best woman in it," meaning heaven, "is Mary, daughter of Imran, and the best woman on it," meaning the earth, "is Khadija." The first male to accept Islam was a 10-year-old boy named Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was the Prophet's cousin, reared in the Prophet's home. Some years earlier, the Quraysh had been through hard times. Although Abu Talib, the Prophet's uncle, was the chief of his clan, which also enjoyed a position of honor in Mecca, he was a man of limited means and a large family. In those hard times, Muhammad, peace be upon him, wanted to do something to help his uncle. He therefore went to speak to another uncle of his, Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, saying, "You know that your brother Abu Talib has a large family, and everyone is going through very difficult times. I suggest that you and I go to him with a proposal of help. You take one of his sons, and I take one to rear in order to reduce his burden." Al-Abbas agreed, and they went and spoke to Abu Talib, proposing that they should have two of his children for as long as the difficult period continued. Abu Talib agreed, provided that they left his eldest son Talib with him. The Prophet took Ali to his home, and Al-Abbas took Jafar. Ali continued to be with the Prophet until he received his message, and he was in the fortunate position of accepting Islam in its very early days. Jafar was also to become one of the early Muslims. The first Muslim man. The first man to accept Islam after the Prophet was his servant, Zayd ibn Haritha. The fact that Zayd should not have a moment's hesitation before accepting Islam comes as no surprise when one remembers his history with the Prophet. When Zayd was 8 years old, his mother, Suda bint Talaba, took him on a journey to visit her people. On the way, a group of horsemen attacked them and kidnapped Zayd, and subsequently sold him as a slave child in one of the Arabian bazaars called Habasha. Apparently, Zaid was sold once or twice before he ended up in Syria. Some time later, a man from the Quraysh called Hakim ibn Hizam bought him and took him to Mecca. Hakim, who was a nephew of Khadija, brought with him several young slaves. His aunt went to visit him after his return. He said to her, "Aunt, look at these slaves and choose whoever you like." She chose Zaid and took him home. This happened when she was already married to the Prophet, but long before he started to receive his revelations. When the Prophet saw Zaid, he liked him and asked Khadija to give him Zaid as a present. She willingly complied. Zaid's father felt his loss very painfully. He could not forget his son because he realized that the boy would have been sold as a slave. As was the habit with the Arabs, he expressed his sorrow in highly moving poetry. "I wonder, would you ever come back? My dearest wish would then have come true. I am reminded of him by the sun when it rises, and his memory comes back to me when the sun goes down. When the wind blows, I am also reminded of him. Long is my sorrow, little is my hope." Reciting such poetry at gatherings and bazaars was the surest method for news to travel in Arabia at that time. Travelers memorized such poetry as they heard it and probably chanted it as they traveled. When they encamped somewhere, reciting that poetry would be the means through which the news was transmitted. It was not surprising, therefore, that in his new dwelling place in Mecca, Zaid should hear his father's poetry. He replied to his message, reciting several lines of poetry in which he mentioned that he was living in Mecca. Before long, his father got wind of this and resolved to travel with his brother looking for Zaid in Mecca. It was some time before Muhammad's prophethood, peace be upon him, when Haritha and Ka'b, sons of Sharahil, arrived in Mecca to learn that Haritha's son Zaid was in Muhammad's household, peace be upon him. Therefore they went to him and made this passionate appeal. "You are the grandson of Abdul Muttalib, the old master of this city. You are the son of the great master of his people. You and your people are neighbors of God in this blessed city. Your reputation has been established for a long while that you feed the hungry and help those who are in need. We have come to you on account of our son, your slave, to request you to be benevolent and to agree to sell him to us." Muhammad, peace be upon him, replied, "What would you say if I made you a better offer?" They asked, "What sort of proposal?" He said, "I will call Zaid and give him a choice. If he chooses to go with you, that will be it. But if he chooses to stay with me, then by God, I would not disappoint someone who chooses me." They said, "Your proposal is more than fair." Muhammad, peace be upon him, called Zaid and asked him, "Who are these two?" Zaid said, "This man is my father, Haritha ibn Sharahil, and this is my uncle, Ka'b ibn Sharahil." Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "I am giving you the choice. If you wish, you may go with them. Or, if you wish, you may stay with me." Zaid unhesitatingly said, "I will stay with you." This came as a shock to the two men. His father said, "Zaid, do you prefer to remain a slave to rejoining your parents, your home, and your tribe?" Zaid replied, "I've seen certain things with this man, and I will never leave him to go anywhere." At this point, Muhammad, peace be upon him, took Zaid by his hand, and together they went to where the people of the Quraysh used to meet near the Kaaba, where Muhammad, peace be upon him, declared, "Bear witness that this chap is my son. He inherits me, and I inherit him." That was the formal method of adoption practiced in Arabia. Zaid's father was pleased by this outcome of his mission, because he was sure that Zaid would come to no harm in the company of Muhammad, peace be upon him. From that day, Zaid used to be known as Zaid ibn Muhammad, peace be upon him. People continued to call him by this name for many years until adoption was totally forbidden some years after the Prophet's settlement in Medina. It was then that God ordered Muslims to call their adopted children by their own parents' names. Adoption was totally forbidden. Zaid then reverted to his name, Zaid ibn Haritha. It was some time before prophethood that Zaid realized that there was something special about Muhammad, peace be upon him. He loved him, and his feelings were reciprocated by Muhammad, peace be upon him, before and after he became a prophet. 2 or 3 years after Zaid's death, the Prophet mentioned him and said, "He was one of the people I loved most." Over the years, Zaid learned enough of Muhammad's integrity, peace be upon him, and kindness to prompt him to accept his message and believe in him without hesitation. The early believers. Thus, the first Muslim family came into existence. There was a man and his wife, a 10-year-old child, and an adult servant, all believing in the new message which proclaimed the eternal truth of God's oneness. The first person to become a Muslim outside the Prophet's immediate family was his close friend Abu Bakr. It was well known that Abu Bakr was not his real name. A person is rarely called Abu when he is born. He gains this title after his first son is born because the word Abu means father of. However, the title Abu Bakr has become so well known that his real name is not known for certain. Some reports suggest that he was called Atiq. Some say that he was called Abdul Kaaba. One report suggests that his mother had several children before him, none of whom lived long. She pledged that should she have another son, she would call him Abdul Kaaba and would make him a servant of the Kaaba. When the boy reached a certain age, he came to be known as Atiq, as if he was freed from death by that pledge of his mother. The Prophet, peace be upon him, however, changed his name to Abdullah because no Muslim could be called servant of anyone or anything other than God. When the Prophet spoke to his childhood friend about Islam, Abu Bakr did not hesitate for a moment. He accepted Islam immediately. The very close friendship between the two men was enough to make Abu Bakr realize that Muhammad, peace be upon him, said nothing but the truth. There is also a report which suggests that one reason why he accepted Islam without hesitation was that a short while earlier he saw in his dream that the moon descended over Mecca and was split into small pieces, with each piece going into a different home. Then it was reassembled as a moon in his lap. He mentioned his dream to some people who followed Christianity or Judaism, and they interpreted the dream to him saying that he would follow the Prophet who was soon to appear. He would be the happiest of people for following him. Therefore, when the Prophet called on him to become a Muslim, he had no hesitation. How authentic this report is, one cannot tell. There was, however, a better reason for Abu Bakr not to hesitate before accepting Islam. Abu Bakr was one of the most distinguished authorities in Arabia on the tracing of people's lineage. He knew how every person descended in his tribe. This was a branch of study which was of great importance to the Arabs. In their tribal society, everyone took pride in his lineage. There was a strict hierarchy which distinguished clans and tribes from one another. To maintain their relative positions, this study of lineage was very important. A person well versed in it was a sort of historian. He knew not only the lineage, but also the history of the people of each clan and tribe. He knew the weak points in everyone's history. Later, when the Quraysh launched a determined campaign of abusive poetry against the Prophet and Islam, Muslim poets, particularly Hassan ibn Thabit, were quick to respond. The Prophet told Hassan to go to Abu Bakr in order to learn about the weaknesses and shortcomings of every clan of the Quraysh. His knowledge and his long-standing friendship with Muhammad, peace be upon him, gave Abu Bakr an insight into his character. He knew that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was always truthful. There was no reason why he should not be telling the truth now that he was speaking of a relationship with God, the Lord and the Creator. To Abu Bakr, the most logical thing was that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was telling the truth. Therefore, when Muhammad, peace be upon him, called on him to accept a message which he stressed would bring him, the Arabs, and all mankind happiness, his attitude was one of immediate acceptance. Abu Bakr realized that it was not enough that he himself should become a Muslim. Since God had sent a new message and a messenger to convey it to mankind, it was necessary that people should hear of it and learn that God wanted them to believe in this message. Therefore, he started to speak to some people whom he knew well. Abu Bakr was very well respected in his community. He was a merchant, well known for his kindly and gentle character. People loved to come to him and listen to him talking about the history of Arabian tribes and Arabs in general. Moreover, he was very kind to everybody. Hence, people of all ages came to see him and frequented his home. It was therefore easy for him to select some of the most intelligent and promising of the young people who came to him to explain to them the message of Islam and to call on them to believe in God and His Messenger. Abu Bakr realized that a new faith needs advocates. As a new believer, he set out to speak to people whom he trusted to be intelligent and judicious and explain to them the essence of the new message of Islam. Soon, some of them responded favorably. The first one to become a Muslim as a result of Abu Bakr's efforts was Uthman ibn Affan, who belonged to the Umayyad clan of the Quraysh. 4 others were soon to follow: Al-Zubair ibn al-Awwam, who was Khadija's nephew, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and Talha ibn Ubaidullah. When all 5 had accepted Islam, Abu Bakr brought them together to see the Prophet, and they declared before him that they believed in God's oneness and in the message of his Prophet, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, peace be upon him. All 5, together with Abu Bakr, were among the 10 persons to whom the Prophet gave towards the end of his blessed life the happy news that they were sure of admission into heaven. The other 4 were Ali, his cousin, whom we mentioned as the first boy to become a Muslim after the Prophet, Umar, who became a Muslim several years later, Abu Ubaidah, Amir ibn al-Jarrah, and Sa'id ibn Zayd. These last 2 also became Muslims in the very early days of Islam. Abu Ubaidah was later to be given by the Prophet the title of the Trusted One of the Nation of Islam. Sa'id was the son of Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufa, who was mentioned earlier as traveling in search of the truth and following the religion of Abraham, peace be upon him. We also mentioned that the Prophet said that on the Day of Judgment, Zayd would be resurrected as a nation on his own. Sa'id, his son, was among the first people who accepted Islam in its early days. Others followed, such as Abu Salama, Abdullah ibn Abdul Asad, Al-Arkam ibn Abi al-Arkam, Uthman ibn Mazun, and his 2 brothers, Qudama and Abdullah, Ubaidah ibn al-Harith, Asma and Aisha, the 2 daughters of Abu Bakr, Khabab ibn al-Arat, Umar ibn Abi Waqqas, Sa'd's brother, and Abdullah ibn Masud and Masud ibn al-Qari. Biographers of the Prophet also mention among the people who accepted Islam in those early days, Salit ibn Amr, Ayash ibn Abi Rabia and his wife Asma bint Salama, Khulais ibn Hudafa, Amir ibn Abi Rabia, Abdullah and Abu Ahmed, the 2 sons of Jash ibn Diab, Jafar ibn Abi Talib and his wife Asma bint Umais, Hatib ibn al-Harith and his brothers Khattab and Muammar, as well as the wives of the first 2, Al-Saib ibn Uthman ibn Mazun, Al-Muttalib ibn Azr and his wife Ramla, Naim ibn Abdullah, Amir ibn Fuhaira, a servant of Abu Bakr, Khalid ibn Sayd and his wife, Amna bint Khalaf, Hatib ibn Amr, Abu Hudayfa Masham ibn Utbah, Waqid ibn Abdullah, Khalid ibn al-Bakir ibn Abdul Jalil, and his 3 brothers, Amir, Akil, and Ilyas, Amr ibn Yasir, and Suhaib ibn Sinan. That makes about 40 people altogether who accepted Islam in a period of 3 years when the Prophet was preaching his message in secret. However, what the early converts to Islam lacked in numbers, they compensated for in caliber. Most of these people possessed qualities of leadership and vision which distinguished them and made the new call stronger than the mere number of its advocates suggests. When one looks closely at those people who accepted the call of Islam, one finds that many of them were still very young. Many were not yet 20 years old. A new message which advocates a total change in the social order often attracts young people whose vision of a better life gives them a strong motive to work hard for their beliefs. Among those in their teens were Al-Zubair ibn al-Awam, Sa'd ibn Abu Waqas, Talha ibn Ubaidullah, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf al-Arkam, Abdullah ibn Masud, and Sa'id ibn Zaid. But it was a mistake to think that the idealism of youth was the only motive for such people to become Muslims. Islam has a simple message which appeals directly to the human mind and strongly appeals to human nature. Many of these young people were of excellent character. Abdullah ibn Masud first learnt about Islam when he was tending his sheep, since he worked as a shepherd. The Prophet and Abu Bakr saw him as they were crossing over to some place outside Mecca. They were thirsty, so the Prophet asked Abdullah ibn Masud, "Have you got any milk?" Abdullah said, "Yes, but I am in a position of trust." The Prophet asked him, "Have you a female sheep which has not yet mated?" Abdullah brought a sheep whose breast had not yet appeared. The Prophet rubbed her at the position of the breast, and soon she had breasts full of milk. Abdullah brought a piece of rock which looked like a bowl. The Prophet milked the sheep and gave Abu Bakr and Abdullah milk, then he drank. He then said to the breast, "Return to your position," and it did. When he saw this, Abdullah wondered and asked questions. The Prophet told him about Islam, and he accepted it. He reports, "I said, 'Messenger of God, teach me.' He went with his hand over my head and said, 'May God bless you. You are an educated fellow.' Later I went to meet the Prophet, and as we were with him over the Mount of Hira, the surah entitled Al-Mursalat was revealed to him, and I learnt it as he was reciting it for the first time. I learnt 20 surahs direct from him over the years. The rest of the Quran I learnt from some of his companions. There were others who were not so young, like Uthman ibn Affan and Abu Ubaidah, who were in their late 20s. Such people were normally of temperate character and sound intellect. Uthman ibn Mazun was probably in his early 30s when he became a Muslim. Before Islam, he declared that he would never drink intoxicants. Alcoholic drinks were very much a part of the social life of Mecca. His sound judgment, however, led him to feel that a drink which caused a man to lose his ability to think properly and judge things accurately was unbecoming of any self-respecting man. There were others in this group of early Muslims who were a little older. The best example was Abu Bakr, who was of the same age as the Prophet, or a year or two younger. These were mostly people who knew the Prophet closely. They knew his integrity and his noble character. Therefore, they were absolutely certain that he told the truth. They followed him as a logical consequence of their conviction. One thing to be stressed about the composition of this distinguished community is the fact that those early Muslims did not belong to any single clan or tribe or social class. They came from all strata of Meccan society at the time. They included people of distinction who commanded high esteem in their community, such as Uthman and Abu Ubaidah. Among them, there were some former slaves like Suhaib, who was probably not even an Arab. Indeed, some were still in the bonds of slavery. As Muslims, however, they all enjoyed equality and a brotherhood that was so real that it eclipsed all blood relationships. Hence, the universality of Islam was established and practiced right from the outset. Those early Muslims formed the nucleus of the community of believers, which was soon to create the most noble society humanity had ever known in its long history. As headquarters, they used the house of one of their number, Al-Arkam, in a central position close to the hill known as Al-Safa. It became the first Islamic school where the followers of the new religion received their instruction in the principles of their faith directly from the Prophet. Indeed, Al-Arkam's house was a mosque, a school, and a meeting place where the new community discussed its affairs. The Prophet spent a considerable amount of time in that house looking after his companions, educating them, and guiding them in their new mission. In those early days, the Muslims were instructed by God to attend to their prayers. The angel Gabriel taught the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the form of prayer which was to become the mark of all Muslims. There were varying reports on the number and length of prayers the Muslims were asked to offer in those days. What is certain is that these were not 5 obligatory prayers every day. Probably, these were only 2, one in the morning and one at dusk. They were to be increased later. A report exists by a man called Afif al-Kindi, who was a friend of Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle. Al-Abbas used to visit him in Yemen when he went on his trade missions. Afif also visited him in Mecca. He reports, "When I was at Al-Abbas's place in Mina, a respectable man came along and had his ablution and stood up to pray. A woman followed him and had her ablution and joined him in prayer. Then a boy close to adolescence did his ablution and stood next to the man praying. I said, 'Abbas, what is this religion?' He replied, 'This is the faith of Muhammad ibn Abdullah, my nephew, who claims that God has sent him as a messenger. This boy is my nephew, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who has followed his faith, and this woman is his wife Khadija, who also believes in his religion.' Many years later, after he became a firm believer in Islam, Afif said, 'I wish I was fourth of that little group.'"